Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maeve Campbell, if you haven't met me already. I'm a climate journalist from London, and I'm pleased to be hosting this next session, which is all about the challenges and the potential of communicating climate. So what I'm going to say first is just, we all are here because we know the science, we agree with the science, crucially, and most of us accept it. We see the fires, we see the floods, we see the storms, we see the heat waves, and the devastating consequences worldwide every week on the news. I work in the news, I have to make that news, but yet we're not acting fast enough. So I spend pretty much every day trying to answer the question of how can we better communicate climate. So I'm really excited that today I'm going to be talking to a panel who are very much experts on that issue. It's all in the storytelling. But before I bring on my panel, I'm going to sit down with Stephen Dunbar Johnson, who is the international president of the New York Times. Please welcome him to the stage. Oh, do I? Okay. Sorry, we've been told where to sit. I didn't realize I had to sit in a certain place. So, Stephen, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
So first question, climate communication, where have we gone wrong?
The challenge with climate communications is that what tends to appear on the homepage or the front page of newspapers, such as the New York Times, tends to be the dystopian nature of the challenge. So we all have a responsibility to put that on the homepage and the front page, but it is at the cost of a lot of the things that are happening in this space, a lot of the innovations and the solutions that are going to help us solve the problems that are being highlighted on the homepage. So there is a real challenge for media organizations as to how we balance the urgency of the crisis, the science, the facts, which we need to be, it's a part of our responsibility to be clearly explaining those to our readers, but at the same time, how do we talk about the other side, the opportunities that there are in solving this challenge? So a lot of us, I think, in the media world are trying to grapple with that. And then there's also the challenge of how do you do effective storytelling. So much of the climate dialogue has been, frankly, quite geeky. Phrases like net zero by 2050. If you go out to the street and ask the average person, what does that mean? They have no idea.
Yeah.
So I think we need to do a better job of explaining, going to the end of that question and asking ourselves of what would our cities need to look like if they were net zero by 2050?
Yeah.
What would our transport system need to look like if it was net zero by 2050? Yeah. What would our health and agricultural systems look like? And if we ask that question, then you start painting a picture that is far more optimistic. So much of the dialogue is about the cost of the change needed, and not enough of the dialogue is about the costs of not doing that change and the opportunity in making that change. And I think the media industry needs to do a better job of trying to get to that place. Yeah.
So we need the geeks, but we also need to show the solutions and show the opportunities so that we can inspire hope whilst balancing the kind of gravity of the crisis, it sounds like you're saying. So on that point, I want to talk a bit about the New York Times, and the climate coverage that you guys do. Because you just mentioned there, health, transport, cities. Is it very much kind of the opinion of the New York Times that climate has a place in every single beat, in every single section of the journalism? Yeah,
I mean, I'm going to go back to 2015, 2016, because that was a kind of a very important year in our for us in terms of our climate coverage, because the editor at the time, who was a gentleman called Dean Baquet, made a decision that we needed to stop doing sort of false equivalency on climate. The science was definitive. Climate change, man-made climate change was a fact, and we were heading to a very difficult place. At that moment, he then decided to, in effect, put affirmative action for climate in our newsroom. So whilst it's clearly climate is a business story, it's a tech story, it's a health story, wellness story, an everything story, we decided to put a climate desk in the middle of the newsroom in New York. And that climate desk is now populated to, we have 20 journalists that are full-time working on the subject of climate. That's not to say that they're not working, because they are working with every desk in terms of the stories. They're doing investigative stories, but they're also working with every desk on whether it's a business story, tech story, or agriculture story.
Sports story.
Sports story, culture story.
And when you implemented that climate desk in the middle of the newsroom in New York, what was the reception from the journalists? Did they say, finally, we need a climate desk? Or did they say, not sure about this?
That's a good question. I don't think there was any resistance to that. The other thing that's important to say we made a decision very early that in order to do good climate journalism, we needed to fully embrace graphics and visual journalism tools. So the 20 people I just mentioned are really just the tip of the spear, because a lot of our graphics team are working on climate stories. Audio team, visual investigations teams, they're working on climate stories. So, and that's one of the beauty of the digital age for us, is that if you're talking about a climate story, let's say you're talking about the change in the Gulf Stream, which is quite a technical, if you just imagine that as script on your phone reading down, it's quite a long story and it's quite heavy.
Yeah.
A lot of science. If you can intersperse it with strong graphics, visuals, videos, to help the reader go through the story and keep them fully engaged, we find that is a very good way of getting the message across effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just wanted to go a bit back to you kind of on a personal level as well, because I know it's important for everyone to know that Stephen works on kind of more of the strategy side. You know, you work on the business model for the newspaper that essentially sustains the journalism, rather than on the editorial side. I know that you have quite an interesting personal journey when it comes to kind of understanding climate issues. You told me previously about a conference you went to. Tell us about that, because I think for someone, you know, we all know that New York Times is, to be honest, it's like the pinnacle of climate journalism. You know, I'm a fan. But, you know, it wasn't always like that, and you yourself weren't always on kind of fighting this fight. So tell us your story.
Well, I was publisher of the Herald Tribune, based here in Paris for a number of years. And the Herald Tribune was bought, but it was 50% owned by the New York Times. That's only relevant in that when I became publisher of the Herald Tribune, I inherited a conference that had been going on for some time called Oil and Money, a very honestly branded event. The Oil and Money conference was one of the most attended events by all the CEOs of the fossil fuel industry. And it was very profitable. So I would go to this event and I would sit there and listen to all of these guys, and because they were all guys. And over time realized that there was no discussion, because this, by the way, was quite a long time ago. This is 20 years ago. I realized that, the noise around climate change and the information about climate change was still pretty nascent. But as it was becoming more and more apparent that this was a real issue, I was struck that this conference didn't talk about that at all.
Yeah.
And it then became clear to me that this was a reputational risk for the New York Times, for the Herald Tribune and the New York Times. And so we pulled out of that event. And then I pivoted to, started something called the Global Clean Energy Forum, which I guess was part of a sort of guilt appeasement for the oil and money years. But from there, I began to learn about climate change, what was happening, the science, but also get really quite excited about the opportunities that were emerging in order to combat this. And then when it came to growing the New York Times outside of the United States, which is my job, is try and get people to engage with our journalism and subscribe to our journalism outside of the United States, it occurred to me that it was a very smart thing to invest in climate journalism, because not only was that central to our mission as the New York Times, this is the biggest existential threat that we face on this planet, but also that it was something, and that was something that would drive the relevancy of the New York Times to non-American audiences because it's a global issue. So it hit the sweet spot for me, and ever since then we've been expanding our coverage, again, because it makes sense for our mission, but it's also a way of engaging readers, and it's worked very well. We also do a lot of live journalism events around climate, which are all focused on solutions, how to drive solutions.
Right. And do you ever, I think as journalists, we often worry that climate fatigue is a thing. People turn on the news, it's wildfires every week. It's very hard sometimes to kind of keep up any hope or any kind of action-orientated mindset when that's all we're seeing every week. Tell us about the solutions approach that the New York Times takes, because sometimes in this field, when you hear solutions, people think, oh, solutions, well, is that a bit naive? Is it a bit idealistic? Oh, let's focus on solutions when, forests are burning. How do you make sure that you're balancing, that balancing act is going effectively?
Yeah, I still think we've got quite a long way to go there. But going back to what I said at the top, we're very aware that so much of the news is around the negative side of things, which particularly for younger readers, that gives them a sense of despair. So we launched something during UN Climate Week last September called the Climate Fix, which is intended to help aggregate all of the journalism that we're doing around solutions in a very pragmatic way so that people can find it more easily, and also give people clear, concrete examples of solutions that are actually implemented and are working.
Can you give us an example of a story?
It could be a story, let's say, in Arizona, how they're implementing, part of Arizona, a whole electric vehicle only zones. There's a story about geothermal, I think it's in Idaho, where they're using geothermal power to power, and very successfully, economically, creating jobs. We've got a series called 50 Solutions for 50 States. Goes state by state, actually looking tangibly at clear solutions that are working today.
Yeah, amazing.
So I think that's important because it begins to give people a little bit of inspiration and ideas of how they can get engaged. We also write practical pieces about how we as individuals can be making a difference, because it's often very confusing. But I think what's more interesting personally is how do young entrepreneurs get into this space? How can they find inspiration from other ideas? If you go to East Africa, for example, it's really interesting to see how many young people are engaged in a very intelligent way of finding solutions. So we're looking to find areas of content that stimulate ideas and create communities around those ideas.
Yeah, amazing. And so we haven't got too long, so we have to invite on our panel soon, even though I don't have a timer, so I'm going off my watch. But I can't leave you before we ask you just about the US landscape, because we can't ignore that. It's the New York Times, Trump, the word climate, living in the UK, I think the word climate is a lot more divisive, it seems, in the US. Do you think that maybe the solution to engaging people who are not so keen on the word climate is to do the story but just not use the word?
Well, a lot of companies who are very committed to their ESG programs, and ESG is that's a phrase that has become very unfashionable in America. But if you talk to most multinational American companies, they are still very committed to their ESG plans. And they're committed to them, why? Because it makes sense for them from a business perspective. This is not something that is, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their bottom lines. But they've realized that for their customers, for risk assessment and risk abatement, that ESG is a smart business thing to do. It's the same with DEI, by the way. This whole thing about DEI is, we at the New York Times are not going to be committed to DEI. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. But it's also a smart thing to do for our business. We want our journalists to represent the society which they're covering.
Yeah.
We need to have a diverse team of journalists in order to do the job more effectively. That is going to drive more readers, that's going to drive more revenue. It's just smart business.
Yeah.
So go to your question, yes, I think businesses may start talking, removing the word climate, but then I don't believe that they're going to stop their action towards this. Some may, but major companies won't, because it makes sense.
It makes business sense.
It makes business sense.
Yeah, okay. Last question. The New York Times is very much seen as, one of the best at storytelling. But what do you think you could learn from others? How do you think that you could improve when it comes to telling the climate change story?
Oh, we could learn from, there's so many good examples of good climate telling, which we should be listening to. I mean, we don't have the right to say that we're the best of everything. We're constantly learning. I mean, Channel 4 News, who you've worked with in the UK, do some very good journalism, which I think highlights the way you should go about it. One example was a segment in their national news show about, it was a nature-based rewilding in Cumbria. That was it. Rewilding in Cumbria. And they started the story by saying, this part of Cumbria has increased their jobs by 70% since they started rewilding. Young people are going back to this part of Cumbria, which had been deserted, but there were no opportunities. The local pub had opened up again. It had closed down. It was, in other words, it was a very human story, which then backed into the climate story, which is what it really was, about this becoming a very important carbon capture project as well, and reinvigorating the ecosystem and the wildlife in that city. So, but rather than go in with this is a carbon capture story, it was a human story, interviewing young people of why they'd gone back.
What very watchable. That's very watchable for the national audience.
Exactly, and we need to be doing more of that kind of journalism.
Yeah, okay. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. Please give him a round of applause. Thank you so much. Fascinating. So I'm now going to welcome my panel to the stage to delve even deeper into the importance of effective climate communication. Please welcome my panel. I thought I would invite you on first and then introduce you so that we can all look at each other, and just actually make a connection, which is nice. So, Mark Maslin. Mark is a bit of a legend in the UK, I have to admit. He is Professor of Earth System Science at University College London and also at the Natural History Museum of Denmark. He's a leading scientist with a particular interest in understanding the solutions to climate change. And he's published over 200 papers and written 10 books.
So I'm not a legend in France. I'm shocked. Come on, add a bit more.
Soon. Joss Ford. Joss is the founder of sustainability communications company Enviral, which tells organizations social and environmental stories, pushing clients to be as impactful as they can be. His approach is all about creativity and climate. He's trying to solve the problem of global yawning.
It's an absolute snooze fest out there, guys.
Next, we have Dr. Sweta Chakraborty, who is a globally recognized risk and behavioral scientist, specifically an expert on global risks ranging from climate change to COVID-19. She's a trusted authority on proactive preparedness to mitigate against the impacts against climate change and is motivated by the need for clear, credible, and evidence-based communication. She's the CEO of We Don't Have Time in the US, and she was recently a climate advisor to Kamala Harris during her presidential campaign.
I don't need to say I'm a little disappointed right now.
Understandable. Lastly, we have Rosemary Lucotte, who is the co-founder and COO of ChangeNOW. She started her career in marketing, but gradually became more and more concerned by environmental issues and the urgency needed to address global warming. So she launched ChangeNOW with a goal to put environmental innovation at the forefront of the French scene. And in a few years, it has grown to become the world's largest event. So please give them another round of applause.
Hi, and welcome.
Thank you. OK, so I'm starting with you, Joss. You're the creative on the panel.
But look at this amazing panel of people. It's so good, and you're going to start with me.
I'm sure that's what you'd all say, so we've got to start with someone. So Joss, my question is, climate change needs some new PR because the current strategy isn't working. I feel like all communications professionals, I'm sure there's a lot of you in the audience here, journalists, storytellers around the world, we should all be kind of coming together with one big meeting to decide what the next steps are. So who's doing PR well at the moment? How do we make climate action have the same kind of popularity as buying the latest iPhone?
Okay, BP. BP are amazing.
Really?
Yeah. The carbon footprint, we've all heard the story. BP came up with the carbon footprint. They worked with a brilliant agency to create a very single-minded platform, the carbon footprint, and we all know and love that. Okay, they put the onus on the individual, but can you imagine if a climate organization worked with a really shit-hot agency and came up with the carbon footprint and put it on businesses, just businesses, and it got the traction that the carbon footprint has had since it got, I think it was the 2000s or something when it got made up. So I think they're doing a really good job. Why? Because they got really creative, single-minded messaging done well. Yeah. I think that sustainability is in a bit of a winter period. The last time we had a summer was probably COP26 time, where there was loads of momentum, loads of innovation, loads of investment going on, and there's not that at the moment, is there? But I think to take sustainability from winter hibernation to spring, comms and brand is the essence of that. Yeah. Embedding it through creativity into the center of our DNA of brands, no matter if you're B2B or B2C, that's what it'll take it.
So it's interesting, we can learn from BP. Sweta, I can't not come to you on that. I feel like you've been in there, in the deep end in US politics. If we can learn from BP, can we learn from right-wing politics?
From the shocking Kamala Harris presidential loss? Yes. So actually, Joss and I were just talking about this before we came on stage and how the right got it right in the United States. It's why, and I know this is triggering for some to hear the name Trump, but it's why Trump is the current president and is currently destroying every aspect of democracy as we know it in modern United States. And in hindsight, it's so obvious. When we were running the Kamala Harris campaign, we thought we had it in the bag. And now looking back, we realized that $100 billion had been put in to education, into media, and ultimately the outcome of that is political leaders that are voted in, like Trump. And they'd been doing this systematically for decades. The liberal or the left side has put in a drop in the bucket compared to how much the conservative right in the US has put in. And so here we are. We're not fighting fire with fire. We're not fighting resources with resources. And the outcome of that is devastation. So the takeaway from this most recent US presidential campaign and what we need to know as a climate community going forward is that we've got to fight fire with fire. We need to really work together. That's also something we don't do well in this community. We are not talking with the same voice. We are not understanding our audiences and what they care about. What are the mental models? That's the most jargony thing I'll say as a scientist on this stage today. What are their mental models? What are their perceptions? What are their schemas? What are their value systems? And then understanding that, mapping that out, truly taking the time. It's not even expensive, it's a bit tedious, but understanding who you're communicating to and then finding the right trusted spokesperson to share that message will get us to the behavioral outcome we want. In the case of the Harris presidential failed election, it would have been to have voted for her. In the case of climate, it's to get everyone to understand that, yes, your carbon footprint matters, so we can actually create values around the environment and become environmental stewards and raise our children with that knowledge of it's not just take from nature, it's a mutual relationship. but it's actually getting people to hold companies and representatives accountable. That's what we really need as behavioral outcomes. So how do we get people to do that? Through trusted messengers and by understanding what matters to them.
So I love this idea of trusted messengers and trusted spokespeople. Just give us a quick, what's an example of a trusted spokesperson in a normal community?
Taylor Swift, who knows her? Anyone? Yeah, I mean, who knows her directly? Who can send her a line? No, I'm being facetious, but the idea is we need to partner with creatives. We need to partner with musicians and athletes, doctors, pharmacists, your hairdressers. We need to activate trusted community members and those that people feel that they trust because they see them on screen all the time, or they pay a lot to go to their concerts. Once we activate that network, that will be the game changer.
Agreed. Mark, I'm going to come to you next because I know you've spent you're a scientist originally, but you've pretty much spent your whole career trying to communicate the science. And I know you mentioned to me recently that you moved away from fear-based messaging a while ago. Why did you move away from that?
So I think the first thing to say is don't rely on scientists to do the communication. And I think this is one of the errors in climate change, which is we have been the forefront of communicating climate change for 30 years. We're not always good communicators. Trust me, there are certain of my colleagues, I do not want to leave the laboratory, okay? They will not communicate in the best way. They will confuse you. They'll use lots of jargon, and you'll just go, what? So I think that's the first thing, which is we need professional communicators. We need experts who understand human behavior to get behavioral change. That's the first thing. The second thing is many, many years ago, the idea that you can change people by fear, the idea that we're all going to burn to death, we're all going to have these extreme weather events. We've been saying this for 30 years and no change has occurred. So I think the new approach must be this win-win, or as I prefer it, win-win-win solutions, whereby you actually appeal to people and you say, we're going to look at your values, we're going to look at what you need and what you want in the future, and we can tie that to climate change. So for example, when I talk about going to a more plant-based diet, and remember, I say plant-based diet. I don't say vegetarian or vegan. I'm actually saying you can still have a little bit of meat if you want to, if that's necessary, because you're still buying into their requirements. But you then say, well, that's going to make you healthier. It's going to make your children healthier, and you're going to live longer. At which point they go, oh, this is great. And then you say, and it's going to save the planet. And I think that's it. It's bringing these things. And we haven't communicated. We can have green cities. We can have clean air. We can have transport systems. I mean, the right has made 15-minute cities, which to me sounds like amazing, like an evil thing that's going to stop you having to commute for an hour a day to go to work. I mean, it's like, and they've won that battle, and I've never understood why. So I think we need real communication specialists, as Josh said. You need PR companies, you need behavioral specialists, and you certainly need ChangeNOW.
That was a very, very good segue. Thank you, Mark. So, Rose, we'll come on to you. You must know a lot about audiences. You've created, one of the biggest events, the world's biggest event for solutions for the planet. Who do you think is the hardest audience to reach when it comes to sustainability and climate action?
Well, so thank you for your words. When we created ChangeNOW, the ecological and social transition wasn't appealing at all. We talked about sustainability. We used words that were used for decades, and that wasn't sexy at all. And I don't know if you're familiar with the adoption curve, of a product, where you have the early adopters, then the early majority, then the late majority. You're familiar with this curve. Well, it has been explained, theorized, that there is a chasm between the early adopters and the early majority. And to cross this chasm, you need to change the way you talk about the product or the idea. And when we launched ChangeNOW, we were exactly at that point in the chasm. The speeches that have seduced the early adopters were not seducing the early majority. And we had to rethink the way we talked about positive impact. And actually, positive impact wasn't a word that existed when we launched ChangeNOW. So we got inspired by, so we can get inspired, yes, by politicians, but we were also inspired by the tech ecosystem. Because the tech ecosystem managed to create an inspirational layer around it. Many success stories that inspired thousands of entrepreneurs who wanted to start also in a garage and end up as like the king of the world, the most, the richest people in the world. So this inspired generations of entrepreneurs. And when we created ChangeNOW, we thought, yes, we have to create this new inspirational layer. We have to highlight success stories, inspirational entrepreneurs, so that they can inspire other people in return and make this, ecological and social transition appealing.
It's interesting that you use the word seduce, because I feel like we do need to make climate change sexy, like we have to. Otherwise, everyone likes sexy things, usually. So if climate change is seductive, or climate action is seductive, I feel it might, welcome people in. But just, I want to come to you on that, because, Musk is is a very controversial figure nowadays. But, when he launched Tesla, I was reading, he pitched Tesla cars as the future of luxury and performance. Originally, he didn't mention the eco, he didn't mention it was going to save the planet. That was his story. You were driving the fastest, coolest thing on the road, and that's what seduced people. So, just tell us, how can we be more creative? How can we go outside the box? What can we do?
Okay, so just to pick up on your point, because you used positive change. We've had sustainability, regenerative, ESG. Actually, it was Dr. Victoria Hirth in a session that you hosted recently, who's got a really interesting concept of well-being for all, forever. And I really, really like that. I really like that element, because you can never argue with a parent that they want well-being for all, forever. You can never argue with somebody who might be looking for their own personal vision to be better, for better well-being. And so I think that's a really interesting North Star that we need to be looking for. And then how do we get people to buy into that North Star of well-being for all, forever? How do we make it sexy? It's through unexpectedness. Ooh. Everything that we do in the world of positive impact, sustainability, ESG is so expected. It's just full of jargon and we all nod along to it. For me, it's when it's when you just break that. It's breaking that.
So I was going to say, how can we make this panel a bit more unexpected?
Okay,
should we run around like?
I'm in heels.
Well, we did talk about a dance routine, didn't we? No, yeah. Actually, there was a really great example here in Paris a couple of years ago. We talk about unexpectedness, and I'm about to talk about Oatly. I mean, how expected is that in a sustainability conference? But what they did is there was some rules that you couldn't do out-of-home advertisement for brands, and so they put this message up around, wouldn't this wall look better with an oat drink commercial? And then they basically got this delivery driver with the Oatly carton, which had their carbon labeling on, and just put it in front of the wall at the perfect angle so it looked like an out-of-home advert. It was unexpected. It was a physical out-of-home campaign which went viral online, and they weren't talking about carbon labeling, but it got people interested. It got people to look at their brand, and then they kind of did the rest of the message online.
So it seems like what we're all talking about is almost sustainability slightly being the afterthought, but it still gets in there, but it might not be the leading
Oh,
aspect?
it should never be literally it should never be the leading thing. You know, like, let's not talk about Musk either, but the luxury thing, he made a shit hot car which accelerates at a ridiculous speed and it goes quite a long way.
Yeah.
And it just happens to be good for the planet.
Yeah.
Like, just a list of priorities of meeting people where they actually want to buy from a brand. That's good.
Sweta, I'm going to come back to you. So I really want to draw here on your expertise, having worked in politics and having worked, obviously you're based in the US. Something that you've said to me before is important in the climate fight is appealing kind of to patriotism and to national pride. Do you think, in the UK we're a bit embarrassed of that? We don't really like being English, do we? It's a bit embarrassing. Whereas in the US, I mean, what do you think, Mark? Are you happy to be English?
I hate to say this, I think the English are the most patriotic people there are.
Oh, do you?
Yes, so I avoid them when I go on holiday.
It depends which English people you're meeting. But do you think we need to appeal to national pride to help people?
That's a little complicated because I would say the US has a history of assimilation versus the UK, which is more multiculturalism, and both have pros and cons, and I feel the assimilation worked until it didn't, and now we have over 50% extreme right that's really owning the landscape in the United States, and I don't know to what extent they've co-opted national pride. Now the American flag is associated with the extreme right, which it shouldn't be the case. So not to say that we shouldn't appeal to national pride. As a behavioral scientist, I would do the research first and understand where we sit and how it's changed and what we could do to co-opt and take back take back science. This whole Make America Great Again, we should be able to take that back and make science great again. In fact, that is the campaign that We Don't Have Time, my company, a partner for you all here, has launched. Because we don't want this American flag, this national pride, and this Make America Great Again to be owned by an extreme fraction of the United States. We, as a global community, can make science great again. And so we are here to own that and take it back, and to remember that nobody cares. The world does not care what you believe. You are going to fall off a balcony if you step off of it. This is great. It's science 101. And so we need to lead with that. That needs to be the North Star, leading with science and being proud to lead with science, because it's what's created the engineering marvel that we're all finding ourselves sitting in right here, right now. What is more tangible than science? So if we lead and control that narrative and take science back and make science great again, then I feel like that's really appealing to not just the US public, but the global public, and ultimately should be our North Star.
I've never heard that before, make science great again. I feel like that's what I'm going to go away with from that conference. I really love that. Someone needs to put that on a t-shirt.
It's already on a cap. You'll see, if you see a red cap that looks like Make America Great Again, it's Make Science Great Again. It's all over here.
Amazing. So, Mark, I'm going to come back to you now. What's the most dangerous myth about climate change you encounter in your daily work?
Oh, where do I start? So I would say that there are multiple levels of climate denial. So I think the easiest one to deal with is the one that says, it's not real, and therefore I'm not going to believe in it. And you can deal with that quite easily. We've been doing that since the 1980s. Then there's the one that says, climate has always been changing, this is just natural. You can deal with that. Actually, I would say the most dangerous one are politicians that say, yes, I completely get climate change, I understand its threats, but we can't afford to do anything about it now. That delaying tactic has actually done more damage over the last 30 years than flat-out denial on X. And I think that's where we have to really put our effort into, is taking those politicians and saying, look, you can be brave now. Yes, it's a huge infrastructure change, okay? And this is where I come in when I communicate. I come from that science background, but the first thing I talk about is money. Okay, when I walk into CEOs, I talk about money. When I talk to the fusion industry or sort of the energy industry, I talk about money. Because new energy building is $3 trillion every single year. That's a lot of money. If you can co-opt that and take that into the renewable sector, you're going to make a lot of money. So sometimes, unfortunately, I have to put that other hat on. I have my science cap on, and then I go, I'm going to have to do some sort of like persuading here. Let's talk about the money.
Do we all talk about the money when we're talking to people? Is that something that we focus on, or is that just Mark? Joss, lead with the money.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, obviously, from a business perspective, and we do about kind of 60% of our work is B2B communications. Obviously, getting to the terminology of the everyday of business is a good way to go and put the business case for taking action. It does ultimately interlink at some level with money.
Yeah.
But the reality is that I'm more interested to know what people are talking about around a dinner table and see what they care about. You know, if we look at energy, it's the cost of energy. It's not about the fact that it comes from a wind turbine that they're talking about it. And so for us, you know, getting the behaviors, getting the data of how people actually interact, and then meeting them where they are, that's where we always look to start and end.
Yeah. Being relatable and accessible, Sweta?
I would say the business bottom line works with that private sector audience. So it keeps coming back to who are you communicating to and what behavioral outcome do you want to see? Are we talking about an individual, a community, a company? Look at who you're talking to, understand what their needs are. Based on that, frame custom tailor the message accordingly. If this is a business, it is about the business bottom line, but then talk about how sustainability feeds into long-term, short-term and long-term business bottom lines, right? So it really comes down to the audience. Can I clarify one thing which I get asked all the time?
Please.
How many, just a curiosity from the audience, how many of you are concerned about this doom and gloom message, or those that you talk to are constantly, don't want to hear the doom and gloom around climate change? Just to see a raise of hands. I just want to clarify this because I've had the privilege of being around several climate scientists, Mark included, that have consensus on how to approach this. So we have to be honest about climate and what's happening, but it needs to be followed up very quickly with action steps, tangible, actionable steps that individuals and communities and companies and public sector, private sector, all of the above can take. And that needs to be underpinned by hope. So it's a combination of fear, sure, doom and gloom or whatever. It's scary. That's why it's doom and gloom, because the reality is that it's scary. So that combination of telling the truth, honestly, what's going on, what's happening with the reality of climate change, followed by hopeful, actionable next steps, that's that magic combination to see behavioral outcome. And we have consensus on that from the scientific community. I just want to share that because
I couldn't agree with that more.
Yes.
I could not agree with that more.
And I have to say, one of the key things that I spend a lot of my time doing is trying to push back to groups that want to make climate change even worse. You know, the North Atlantic's going to collapse tomorrow. No, it's not. Oh, suddenly we're going to have mega hurricanes. No, we're not. We're just going to have bigger, stronger hurricanes. You know, again, climate change as the science presents it is scary enough. The changes that are going to happen between 1.5 and 2 degrees are really going to be challenging to modern society. We do not need this apocalyptic stuff that comes out of particularly NGOs, and that's almost as damaging sometimes as the denial, I don't see those fires, they were man-made, they were caused by arsonists. And so therefore I spend a lot of my time balancing on this sort of like narrow gap, saying, okay, this is the science, and yes, my colleagues have just published an extreme paper, but hey, they want to get their face on Time magazine, and no, it's not right, moving back to the center. So it's bad enough as it is, but you're absolutely right. We, as a community, keep going, yes, but you can do things about it. We can move. We have all the actual sort of technology we need to change now. And the thing that frustrates me, and sorry, I'm going to have a rant here, okay? We're using 19th century technology. We're burning stuff and basically pumping soot and dust and CO2 into the atmosphere. Whereas we have 21st century technology, electricity. And if you take the whole of Europe and you changed it to electric overnight, forget aviation and concrete, okay, let's keep that to one side. Everything else, we would straight away save 40% of our energy because electricity is so much more efficient. Because guess what? It's new technology.
So it's very much the sensationalizing that we need to stay away from, because it is scary enough, to be honest. And just, I'd love to go back to Rose here just about the concrete actions, because we were all saying, I'd love to go around everyone actually and just talk about a concrete action, because, we've tried to solve climate communication in one panel. We've tried our best. But I wanted to come to you quickly just to talk about at ChangeNOW. You told me a good story when we were speaking earlier about a partnership or something that came physically out of the summit.
Yeah, so about action. When you enter the summit, I'm sure you noticed this sentence, which is kind of a motto for us. It's, with action comes hope. And yes, action is key to bring hope back and to help people move. And I have, a very concrete example of something that happened at ChangeNOW a couple of years ago. We created a connection that had strong ripple effects. We created the connection at ChangeNOW between the French government and the Slovenian solution, which is addressing the problem of microplastics. When you do a washing cycle, you release microplastic into the water, because we have a lot of clothes made of synthetic fibers. And then when the water goes into the sewage system, you can't get rid of the microplastics. And this is a huge problem, because the pollution in the ocean, most of the plastic pollution, is due to those microplastics. So we identified the problem, but we couldn't act. The French government wanted to act, but the industrials said, no, we just can't stop this. We can't capture those microplastics. At ChangeNOW, we made the connection between the government and a Slovenian solution, which is exactly doing this. Filters for microplastics in washing machines. And from this connection came a meeting. After this connection, they organized a meeting at the ministry, and now it is written in the French law that starting from this year, 2025, all new washing machines sold in France must be equipped with microplastic filters. So this is a concrete example of what can happen after the summit, so out of all the connections you will make, but it's also a proof that when you don't have the solutions, it's very difficult to take decisions, to act. But once you have solutions, when you see concrete actions, then you can act in return. And at ChangeNOW, every year we ask, when you registered, you were asked if you felt capable to act for the planet. Around 50 to 60% of you said yes, which is already really good, because you are a lot of change makers here. But last year, we had the same result. And we asked the question after the summit. And after the summit, you were more than 80% to say that, yes, you can act. So when you see concrete actions, yes, then it gives you the power to act.
It's really hopeful to hear that story. I'm sure that's a really inspiring story for everyone. I really felt that when you told me. That's great to hear. And I feel like I'm going to go around and just get a last word from all of you. Unfortunately, we do have to finish because we have someone coming on next. I feel like we could have had an hour with each of you individually, because you all have such interesting stories. I'm sure you'll all agree. We're just going to go around quickly. Something concrete, something actionable, something you would like the audience to take away. Mark.
Okay, so I'm going to task you all to talk about climate change. This is your superpower. It is really interesting that when people talk about it, things change. There's a certain company, Sopostera here, who I've worked with for years. It started at the base level. There were a couple of people that had climate anxiety. They talked about it over the coffee. It's France, of course it was coffee. They talked about it over the coffee machine, and they realized they could do small things. The company then changed over a couple of years to become a AAA rated at the Carbon Disclosure Project. Do not underestimate your individual power to talk to people and influence people. And the thing is, you may never, ever know what that influence is, but just keep talking about it positively and making change happen.
My go?
Yes, please.
Don't write the brief yourself. Work with communications experts to write the brief. And
basically hire Joss.
Hey, I didn't say it like that. No. Internally in your companies, like often it's like the founder or the CEO or somebody who's detached from the everyday who writes a brief. Work with a communications expert to write the brief. In that brief, put in a line, a scoring mechanism. Will it cause global yawning? Is it boring? Is there a threat to it being boring? And have check-ins throughout the process of creating it to see if it's too full of jargon or if it feels a bit too just, blah and samey. And then go and work with different creatives to go and deploy that. There's a brilliant organization called Creatives for Climate. I think they're here, and they've got a great platform for individual freelancers, groups of freelancers, as well as agencies. Go to them and then make stories great again. Save the world from boring sustainability.
Make stories, make science. I also just think before we move on, we need to translate global yawning into French. Just so that we all...
I'm not the person to do that.
Rosemary, how would you say global yawning? Like bailler? Is it to yawn?
Ennui.
Ennui?
L'ennui climatique.
Ennui climatique. Okay, so that's what we're taking away. For anyone French, ennui climatique. Sweta.
Okay, how many in the audience say that they have some sort of anxiety around climate change? This is like every hand going up at this point. So the
group therapy session afterwards, yeah?
The antidote to anxiety, climate anxiety, is action. To take action, open up your phones, download the We Don't Have Time app. If you already have it, it's free. Just download it. If you already have it, sign up for the Make Science Great Again campaign. Very clear action steps to take. It'll help with that anxiety you're experiencing. And then you'll also be plugged in to be able to identify where you want to get involved, right? Depending on who you are and the work you do, you can plug into fashion or agriculture, transportation. There is actions to be taken across public sector, private sector, and let's find a custom tailored action for you that's right. We help accelerate that for individuals and for companies. So please download the app. That's a great action step to take.
Thank you.
And I also have an action for you. When you go out of the summit, I would like you to have in mind your top 3 solutions or speakers you met, you saw today, because they inspired you. And because they inspired you, they will also inspire other people around you. And because you were inspired, you will be able to talk about it in an appealing way. So yeah, just have in mind when you leave the summit, when you leave the Grand Palais, what is your top 3 solutions or speakers?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Please give them a big round of applause. Thank you so much. So this is the last session of the day, but we have 10 more minutes left. We have a keynote from Eva Morel, who is the co-founder of Quota Climat, which is a French NGO working to improve the media coverage of environmental issues. Eva founded Quota Climat in 2022, and she has since written and advocated for a citizen bill at the French Parliament to regulate climate disinformation. So she's going to come on. She's going to come on and she's going to give a keynote. And as I say, it's the last session of the day, but we have 2 more days. So I hope to see you on Friday and on Saturday. And I hope to connect with as many of you as possible. I'm based in the UK, but je parle français un peu. I try to speak French a little bit, and I come over as much as I can. So please welcome Eva.
At the end of January this year, an economist said on live radio that global warming was a real chance, notably for India. The journalist replied that indeed, the economic opportunities of global warming were poorly discussed in public debate, and that it was a good point. At the beginning of March, the CEO of Airbus, the French aerospace leader, claimed on public television that planes were more sustainable than trains. No one contradicted him. Journalists looked surprised, but did not say a word. At the end of March, the spokesperson of the Rassemblement National, the French far-right political party, claimed that renewables did not work on live television. The journalist approved and then laughed. I could go on like this for a long time. These are signals that climate disinformation has invaded our news media. In only 3 months of airtime, from January to March 2025, we detected 128 cases of climate disinformation in French TV and radio. You probably thought that climate disinformation was only happening on social media, right? Well, if only. Climate disinformation has invaded the informational source citizens trust the most, our news media. And in the meantime, climate media coverage decreases. Between 2023 and 2024, we lost in France 30% of coverage. And this is worse. Climate media coverage peaks during extreme weather events, but only to describe those events. Climate media coverage and the solutions stagnate and even decreases during those media events. This means we speak less of solutions when public attention is at its highest. And this means that while climate disinformation gains ground, access to quality information is decreasing. This is a collective issue, because this means we are losing citizens' attention. We are also aggravating climate anxiety by silencing levels of action that could make us feel in motion to remedy the crisis at every level. This also means that we are giving companies that pollute a free pass to pursue this lucrative path, and it is at the expense of the rest of us. And this also means that we are discouraging decision makers and political leaders to address global warming, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion through ambitious commitments and policies. This is what incentivized me and my co-founders to launch Quota Climat. In 2022, we were working at the French Parliament as parliamentary assistants during the French presidential election. And in March, the 6th IPCC report had just been launched, claiming that not only the existence of global warming and its human origin were unequivocal, but also that urgent action needed to be taken in order to save the billions of lives endangered. At the same time, we witnessed a mix of ignorance, disinterest, and curious defeatism when concrete measures were discussed by members of parliament, but also more largely by the political personnel. Naively questioning why that was the case, we realized that a crucial reason was the lack of media scrutiny when climate action was in question. It was incredibly easy to bullshit your way out of interviews when it came to climate change, and when even interviews addressed the issues, which was the exception rather than the rule. We even witnessed the far right being exempted from addressing the climate section of a debate to dedicate more time on immigration. Let's be honest, we were witnessing a failure of the news media to be effective counterpowers in the face of climate change. In some extreme cases, this failure even translates into a short-term inability to provide life-saving information in times of crisis. Remember last year in Valencia, Spain, where during the flood, fake emergency numbers circulated and preventing people from being rescued fast enough. When in Florida, United States, during Hurricane Milton, people refused to leave their homes because they were convinced that they would get preempted by the state. It seems that this failure is rapidly evolving into a post-truth situation where climate science is something you believe in and not something you know. A world where believing in climate science and the severity of its impact is becoming a political cleavage rather than a unifying threat. And by political cleavage, it means vulnerability to a coalition of convergent interests betting on it to thrive. I am talking about foreign interferences, but also about the fossil industry, the attention economy, and also the far-right movements. Because their interests are slowly converging, and they are trying to converge to slow climate action down, they reinforce themselves. And as Michael Mann, the American climatologist, calls them, they are the coalition of the unwilling. As we speak, they are winning. They are winning polls, they are winning elections, and they keep destroying our living conditions for their benefit. When they win, democracy loses. And when they win, humanity loses. But in the wake of this dystopia, we are not helpless. We have legal tools that can be mobilized to claim our right to information, to claim our right to honest and rigorous information, to claim our right to environmental information, and to claim our right to pluralism. This is what Quota Climat does. We had been extensively monitoring climate media coverage in 2022, but starting from 2023, we started sending complaints to the French media regulator on uncontradicted climate disinformation cases. We were determined to put an end to impunity when it came to the negation of climate facts. To give you a rough estimate, we sent 25 complaints to the French media regulator on specific documented cases. And 1 year later, it worked. In 2024, for the first time, the media regulator published 3 warnings, and notably the first financial penalty for a case of climate disinformation on live TV against CNews, amounting to 20,000 euros. This was a world first. And this was proof that our right to quality information could still be defended, that we were not powerless in the face of climate disinformation campaigns and electoral strategies betting on it as a tool. It was the first time in history that a media regulator recognized the international climate consensus as a fact. This is unprecedented. But this could not only be the sole regulator's interpretation. This is why we wrote a citizen bill offering to modify media regulation in order to anchor it in hard law. We went to members of parliament, and one by one, we convinced them that defending the integrity of information on climate change was mutually beneficial, that it was a win-win, that no one could honestly be proud to feel and feed and politically benefit from collective deception. And 3 years after the beginning of this advocacy work, 80 members of parliament are championing the bill from left to right. This is proof that climate science can still unify, that this is not too late to fight for this right, that we can fight for our rights. And there is still a long way to go to solidify our fundamental right to environmental information, and before news media become effective counterpowers, enabling us to fight anti-climate forces at equal terms. But we strongly believe that this is not a lost fight, as we are often being told. If we manage to obtain accountability in France, it can be obtained elsewhere. We are not members of the Climate Action Against Disinformation, a global coalition of over 80 organizations making everything they can to empower civil society. The messages we are not alone, but we need everyone to join the fight for information integrity. Because the battlefield is our values, our beliefs, our daily actions. To act alongside us, you can start diversifying your sources of information. You can make your expectations known to newsrooms and journalists. You can train your critical thinking, and you can support organizations like ours that fight for information integrity for the sake of all of us. Thank you.